This was not written for chiefs.
What do you mean not written for chiefs? Of course they're written for chiefs. Well,
Emmy, hear this! Among my people, we carry many such words as this from many lands, many worlds. Many are equally good and are as well respected. But wherever we have gone, no words have said this thing of importance in quite this way. Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words, proudly saying, "We the people." That which you call id plebnista was not written for the chiefs or the kings or the warriors or the rich or the powerful, but for all the people. Down the centuries, you have slurred the meaning out of the words, "We the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. To ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution, these words and the words that follow were not written only for the Yangs, but for the Coms as well.
The Coms?
They must apply to everyone, or they mean nothing. Do you understand?
I do not fully understand. One named Kirk. But the holy words will be obeyed. I swear it.
No question about his guilt, Captain. But does our involvement here also constitute a violation of the Prime Directive?
We merely showed them the meaning of what they were fighting for. Liberty and freedom have to be more than just words.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, and your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, and your chancellor of cheerfulness, and lest we not forget, the evangelist of the imagination, and your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am here Robcasting it, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 599. 599 episodes of Robservations, a show about something. Wow, 599. Amazing. So the other day, I talked about how we're going to downplay the politics on this show. But today, I wanted to discuss an issue that I guess you could call a political issue. Although, when I grew up, I never thought it was one. Because it has to do with the First Amendment of our Constitution. And I figured, as Americans, why argue over free speech? Part of the First Amendment of the Constitution. I never thought that would be a political issue or divisive in any way. I figured that that's the First Amendment to our Constitution. Obviously, you heard a phenomenal recitation of the preamble from Captain James Tiberius Kirk of the heavy cruiser USS Enterprise, which probably just got this stream demonetized. So, okay, I'm willing to accept it for this. So, I did want to talk about free speech today, and some of the things that have been going on lately about free speech, and specifically the internet, and an article I read in the Hollywood Reporter about a specific area of our government as it applies to free speech. So I thought that was sort of interesting. Now, so our Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights, you have the preamble, and then you have the First Amendment. And I wanted to talk about that. And the First Amendment reads as such. In case you didn't know, in case you, maybe none of you are constitutional scholars, but if you're not, I'm here to tell you, or at least to read it to you, what is the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Very simple. It's one sentence. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, one of the things that I've always thought is that as Americans, the one thing that we can all agree on is our Constitution. And I think the way the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are written are very self-explanatory and very clear. However, I do think that as time has passed, the clarity of these things has become a bit muddled by, let's say, a desire to, I don't know, change these things or sort of decide what they really meant, when I think it's pretty self-explanatory, at least to me. Anyway, the First Amendment, I think, is very clear. I think free speech is the very foundation of a free society. And I think that one of the great things about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is that sure, the Founding Fathers took from a lot of places. And as I've said before, the Founding Fathers knew that they themselves were imperfect people. But what they were trying to do was design a government by the people and for the people that didn't have to necessarily be perfect, but was open to evolution as life progressed, as things progressed, which I think is very intelligent. And I find it interesting, though, that one of the things that I see increasingly under siege is the siege. Is that the French way of saying it? Siege is the idea of free speech. It's funny because it's something I never thought would ever be assailed in my lifetime. Well, there's an interesting article that I read in the Hollywood Reporter. It was published on January 13th, 2021, and it was written by Eric Garner. And the article is, "If Big Tech loses its legal shield, should Hollywood worry?" Now, there's been a lot of talk lately. I don't know if people have followed or anyone really knows everything about Parler. Parler was set up to be sort of let's just, in simple language, a Twitter for conservatives. Now, I signed up for a Parler account. I had one. I hadn't really used it yet. I've used Twitter extensively, obviously. You can always find me on Twitter. My DMs are open. But I've used Twitter extensively, and I started a Parler account. I was really interested in seeing what people have to say. I'm always interested in delving into hearing all points of view. Interestingly enough, it's always, well, not always, but I get more pushback from people that I would consider to be on my side of the aisle than anyone else. And my side of the aisle is, I consider myself a liberal Democrat in the sense that I think of myself as a classical liberal. I guess now that would mean like I lean libertarian, but it's such a strange thing to me. Basically, I believe in common sense and science. Those are where my allegiances lie, truly, not necessarily to one political party or another, but I believe in common sense and science. So anyway, I found it interesting that Parler was completely taken offline. Google, Apple, Amazon, they, let's not say conspired, but they decided that Parler was expendable, that they could get rid of it under the guise that Parler was basically used to, well, help command and control the siege on the Capitol. So for that reason, Parler was taken offline. Now, if it can be proven that certain platforms were used for command and control to plan and organize an insurrection, a riot, a gathering, call it what you will, And that should be the determination there. Was it a riot? Was it an insurrection? What was it exactly? But I think a platform that was designed to be for speech, yes, directed. They prided themselves. They said, if you want to come here for free speech. Now, I'm neither pro nor con Parler. To me, it was another platform for people to converse, as any platform is. But the real question is, how does that relate to free speech? And a lot of people are under the they believe that Twitter or Facebook or Parler or Google, that they have free speech on these platforms. Let me tell you right now, that is not true. If any of big tech wants to censor your speech, they can. And that is not a violation of your First Amendment rights, because they're independently owned. They're not connected to the United States government. The First Amendment only applies to the government not being able to limit your free speech, not big tech. And this is something that I think needs to be understood. This is not a political opinion. It's just a fact. It's how things work. So anyway, in the wake of this, there was this interesting article that I wanted to share with everybody. And here's the article. If big tech loses its legal shield, should Hollywood worry? A growing chorus of politicians is looking to rein in Twitter and Facebook over misinformation or censorship claims, but regulation has the potential to impact traditional media too. Over the past quarter century, for better or worse, one law has played an outsized role in the vibrant internet we know today. Yet, amid the fallout of the Capitol Hill riot on January 6th, calls to reform Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act have grown louder. Some lawmakers complain about the spew of hatred and legion of disinformation. Others detest the power of big tech to choose whose voice is loudest on platforms seen as akin to town squares. Politicians on both sides of the aisle hold up a repeal of Section 230 as the appropriate response to everything from the Capitol insurrection to the suspension of Donald Trump's Twitter account 2 days later. Unfortunately, a Section 230 repeal won't be enough to achieve what some political leaders are really after: a rebalance of the power structure. And that holds danger for those who traffic in speech, including movie and television producers, plus journalists and TV newscasts. Section 230 reform is a sign that the forces of censorship are winning the legislative battles, says Eric Goldman, a professor at Santa Clara University School of Law. Hollywood should be very, very nervous that they will be the censor's next target. Section 230 is a key 1996 law that allows interactive service providers, like Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, to host third-party content, like tweets or videos, without fear of bearing liability, with some exceptions, for what users are posting. Now, libel laws apply to things like newspapers or old-school communications, television shows, that kind of thing, but they don't necessarily apply to the internet. Hence, that's what Section 230 is. It protects the internet. With some exceptions. For what users are posting. Okay, so Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube to host third-party content like tweets or videos without fear of bearing liability, with some exceptions, for what users are posting. It also permits these digital services to step in when they see objectionable content and restrict access to such material. As Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat, Oregon, who co-authored this statute, explains, Section 230 is both a sword and a shield. The former, so that tech companies can take down lies and slime. The latter, so that users, not the website that hosts their content, are the ones responsible for what they post. And what would the internet look like without Section 230? As reflected on court decisions that precipitated Section 230, any digital service choosing to moderate some distasteful content would gain legal responsibility for everything. As a result, the choice for these websites would be to act overly aggressive when wearing the moderator's hat or be willfully blind to everything bad on the platform. Most tech companies would likely protect user experience and take an aggressive approach to content deemed objectionable. Do Republican politicians and right-leaning media figures believe otherwise? Of late, Republicans implied that taking away big tech's legal shield would lead to less censorship, defined in their eyes by suspended accounts and depromoted right-wing content. But the only thing likely to happen upon the removal of Section 230 will be disappointment. That's because speech can be controversial without being unlawful, and because adjusting the incentives on removal of bad content will hardly mean satisfaction when that content goes away. That applies to Democrats as well. For that reason, lawmakers may eventually aim to enforce some sort of attempt at neutrality or even compel social media companies to carry certain speech in an effort to undercut the tremendous power of popular digital platforms. Some in Congress have already made that step. For example, embattled Senator Josh Hawley, Republican Missouri, proposed in June that tech companies prove to the Federal Trade Commission by clear and convincing evidence that their algorithms and content removal practices are politically neutral. By the way, I agree with that. Traditional media has witnessed this type of controversy play out to an extent. In the mid-20th century, amid the belief that radio stations were hosting one-sided attacks against politicians, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, required that broadcasters present a balanced perspective on issues of public interest. The so-called Fairness Doctrine survived a 1969 Supreme Court review because of the scarcity back then of radio frequencies, only to be jettisoned during the Ronald Reagan administration under the view that it was infringing upon free speech rights. Any new attempt by the government to enforce neutrality or compel speech on social media platforms, such as hypothetically denying Twitter the authority to ban Trump or requiring Facebook to present multiple sides of an issue, would undoubtedly trigger a legal response. If many lawmakers aren't quite ready yet to more directly regulate the speech they see, that's probably because they know that such attempts would be susceptible to First Amendment challenges. That's where Hollywood comes in. While fooling around with user-generated content impacts the entertainment industry on the margins, think talent scouting on YouTube or Facebook, and Twitter-based marketing campaigns, nothing would be as game-changing as the notion that the government gets to lay down broader rules about what speech is disseminated. If politicians can tell platforms you have to carry President Trump's speech, there's a short distance in dictating what op-eds are to run on the New York Times or what perspectives are shown on television, says Daphne Keller, the director of the program on platform regulation at Stanford University. In many ways, the talk surrounding Section 230 has obscured the First Amendment dynamic. Many in the creative world may be conditioned to be skeptical about big tech's legal shield, given their lingering concerns about copyright infringement, exempted under Section 230, and the way that these digital titans have disrupted Hollywood's old business models. There's certainly been a clash of competition, says Keller, but in terms of the values held by many in Hollywood, I imagine there are many who care deeply about the First Amendment and would hardly like the results if Section 230 is crossed out. So, again, this section is something that, I was relatively unaware of. But one of the things that obviously I think is incredibly important, especially in a free society, is free speech. Now, one of the things that I think that the Founding Fathers just assumed when they founded our republic, and again, I don't I could be wrong, was that there was, common sense, or that there was a desire that we as all Americans shared certain values at our core, which is why we wanted to start a new country in the first place. Obviously, we saw in the 1800s that our country was ripped apart over, well, basically the issue of slavery. It was an economic issue mostly. It was a human rights issue, certainly. But look where that led. So we're not always on the same page. However, free speech is something I believe that's getting more and more important as we move into the 21st century, and we really need to decide how we're going to come to grips with free speech in terms of our internet platforms and even how we're going to talk to one another. I believe that the free flow of ideas, all ideas, even the worst ideas you've ever heard in your life, they will always be exposed if they're allowed to continue to be examined. When you stop examining ideas, the worst ideas won't go away. They'll just go underground. The more we can have free speech, the more we can converse, the more we can bring all ideas into the light and discuss and debate them in a free society, I think the better off we're going to be. Now, I also think that speech, we do, like with anything else, if you're part of a community, there are community standards that should be upheld. And I think that one of those things is, hopefully, that you're not harming someone else by doing the things that you want to do. For instance, that's why I don't think libel laws, I think they're important. You know, I don't think you can just come out and destroy someone's credibility or person or business. I think you need to have evidence to back those things up, because then we wind up with what happened during the Red Scare. But here's the thing, and here's the thing that scares me the most. Who decides? With all of this, well, I mean, am I a Trump supporter? No, I never was. Do I think it was right to take the President of the United States off of our social media platforms? 100% I think it was wrong to do that. Whether we like President Trump or not, he was elected President of the United States. And it scares the hell out of me. I don't care if Donald Trump is crazy or if he speaks the ultimate truths of the universe. He's still the President of the United States. And look, to curtail his platform now, I mean, sure, yeah, he was impeached a second time, but he's still the President of the United States. And the real question is, did he have his day in court? Was there due process? And if you can take the President of the United States offline, what protections does any citizen have? And who exactly made the decision to do so? Now, I get it. When you're talking about platforms like Twitter, they're privately held companies, and they can do whatever the hell they want. However, it's okay when President Trump was, tweeting all he wanted during his presidency, but then when something happens that, now we're really objecting to what's going on, let's take him offline. I find this to be a very dangerous precedent. And the real question is, who are these arbiters of what can and can't be said? How have they been trained? Do they have psychological training? Did they get a PhD in speech? It really frightens me. I made one tweet earlier in 2020, in the middle of 2020, in the summer, and the backlash against me was, I found out what that was like to be canceled by people who, were they justified in their response to me? Did I get my day in court? Did I get anything? Did I get any consideration at all? I got consideration from a lot of people, actually, that came out in support of me. It was one tweet. I think a lot of people, there are people that get mad at me for my Star Trek Discovery tweets and have horrible things to say, but I don't go and say that they should be deplatformed or taken off Twitter because they hate my Star Trek Discovery opinions. I think it's a really, really difficult issue. It's an issue that in our high-tech world we have to take very, very seriously, and I think that we have to be ever vigilant about where we're going as a culture and as a group of people. What are we going to do about free speech? I never thought the school I went to, the Evergreen State College, the student uprising that we witnessed there in 2017, that resulted in Brett Weinstein, the evolutionary biology teacher who was run out of that school. Well, let me tell you, I went to Evergreen in the mid-'80s. And what happened in 2017 was, I thought, disgusting, frankly. And as somebody who went to that college, and that college meant something to me, I went there for 3 years before I transferred to USC. And to see that kind of quashing of free speech in academia, which is happening all over the place, frankly, well, I thought it was disgusting, sad, and scared the shit out of me, because people were willingly, they were pillorying somebody for speaking their mind. And that's terrifying, because where does it end? And the last people in the world that I think should have anything to say about free speech are students who are learning about these things. So who put them in charge? Why do they get to define what speech is okay and what speech isn't okay? I mean, what do they know? That's why they're in college. They've gone to college to presumably learn. That's what higher education's for. And yet now we're seeing students telling the faculty, the very people they're paying to teach them, that they know better. It's a weird world out there, and I don't quite get it. There's a couple of other things that I wanted to share with you. This was an article that I found in, it was on Vox, I know, but this was published on March 10th, 2019. And a philosopher makes the case against free speech. And this article was written by Sean Eiling. And he writes, I don't consider myself an absolutist about anything except free speech. The value of free expression seems so fundamental to me that it hardly needs a defense. It is, after all, enshrined in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. But like any dogma, there is utility in occasionally challenging the assumptions that undergird it. Which brings me to a paper I recently read in the Sydney Law Review, titled The Case Against Free Speech. The author is Brian Leader, a political philosopher at the University of Chicago. Leader argues that we shouldn't think of free speech as an inherently good thing, and that there are negative consequences for pretending that it is. The sort of speech he's talking about is public, the kind of stuff we hear on television or read in newspapers. He's not suggesting that we should even think about regulating private or interpersonal speech, and in fact, he doesn't think we can even regulate public speech, mostly because we just don't have a reliable way to do it. But he does raise some interesting objections against what's often called the autonomy defense of free speech, which holds that people are only free to the extent that they're allowed to say what they want, read what they want, and determine for themselves what is true and what is false. According to Leader, this is a bogus argument, because people are not actually free in the way we suppose. We're all conditioned by our environment, and we want what we want, and think are really just products of social, economic, and psychological forces beyond our control. If he's right, then the autonomy defense of free speech is just wrong and probably dangerous. I spoke to Leader about what he thinks we get wrong about free speech, and why most of the arguments people make in defense of it fall apart when you examine them closely. A tightly edited transcript of our conversation follows. Eiling goes on to say, in this interview with Brian Leader, let me start by summing up your argument as simply as I can, and we can go from there. I take you to be saying that most of our public speech, the kind of speech we consider morally and politically serious, is not only useless but actually hinders our collective effort to get at the truth, and therefore we shouldn't permit its expression without considering the social costs. Leader says, that's really close, but I think it's not quite right on one important respect, because at the end, I actually argue for a pretty strong libertarian approach to free speech, but not on the grounds that the speech necessarily has value. A lot of it has no value, as you correctly said in your summary. But basically, I don't think we can be confident that the regulation of speech, or the regulators of speech, would make the right choices in discerning what is good and bad speech, or what is helpful or unhelpful speech. But this says more about the pathologies of the American system than it does about the value of freedom of speech. Eiling goes on to ask, we'll come back to the regulator problem because I think it ultimately undercuts any effort we could ever make to control speech. Maybe it'll help if you first explain why you want to take a sledgehammer to the assumption that free speech is an inherently good thing for society. Leader says, My paper is about running through all the arguments people make in defense of this assumption and showing why they don't hold up. I'll start with the simplest one, which is this idea that a free marketplace of ideas is likely to help promote the discovery of the truth. This is probably the most famous defense of free speech associated with the British philosopher John Stuart Mill. But what people don't often stop and notice is that even Mill thought certain background conditions had to be established for it to really be true that a marketplace of ideas would lead to the discovery of the truth. Mill said, people have to be educated, and they have to be mature. Those are pretty thin conditions, and you might worry that a lot more is required for a real marketplace of ideas to be conducive to the truth. As I point out, we have an important institution in American society that aims to discover the truth, namely the court system. And the striking thing about the court system is that it completely rejects the marketplace of ideas view. It says, it's crazy to think we'll discover the truth just by permitting people to express any view they want, make any claim they want. In the court system, we impose massive restrictions on speech to facilitate the discovery of the truth. Sean Eiling asks, okay, I'm glad you brought up your court analogy. Here's my problem. A courtroom and a political community are wildly different contexts, which even you acknowledge in the article. To take one difference, a court's job is to establish the facts so that the jurists can decide accordingly. But politics is about values as much as facts. Is there any way for a community to decide how to live and what's worth pursuing without allowing the free exchange of ideas? Brian Leader goes on to say, a fair question. I would disagree a bit with the assumption that politics is mainly about values rather than facts. An awful lot of politics is about facts and their relationship to the values that can be realized in concrete policies. So I take one of the examples I use, the Bush administration's efforts to justify the illegal war of aggression against Iraq in 2003. That turned heavily on the misrepresentation of the facts. It turned heavily on Fox News in particular, indoctrinating a large part of the population into thinking that there was some connection between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda when there was none. And then take something like climate change, where there's a consistent disagreement about the facts with so-called skeptics who insist in the public sphere that science doesn't really establish this. There are fact disputes. These are fact disputes, not value disputes. I certainly agree with you that there are value disputes, but the establishment of facts is hugely important. Sean Eiling goes on to say, just to be clear, I'm not saying facts don't matter. I'm saying politics is about deciding what we ought to do in light of what is. And in order to have that kind of conversation, we need the free exchange of ideas. Leader goes on, again, I'd resist that a little bit. I think most of our disputes are about factual questions. I mean, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren aren't saying, in order to promote the values of equality and well-being, we need higher taxes on the rich. And the other side isn't saying, we're not interested in equality or freedom. They say, we don't think that's the way to realize those values. Sean Eiling says, I disagree about that, but I don't want to tumble down a rabbit hole, so let's stay on topic. Is there any way to maintain a free society without simply accepting that most opinions on serious topics are bad and ill-informed, and yet that's the price we pay for allowing citizens to express their political identity? Brian Leader says, there's clearly a lot of value to people in letting them express their political identity, their moral views, and so on. It's important to people's well-being to be able to speak their mind. I don't want to discount the value of that. I just think that's one value that should go into a broader calculation that takes into account all of the harms that are related to the expression of certain kinds of views. Sean Eiling says, do you think people are free in any meaningful sense if what they're allowed to hear or see or read is controlled or constrained in any way? Brian Leader says, it depends on what kind of control and regulation is involved. So I'll give you another analogy. I can control what the students in my class read and discuss. I actually think this enhances their freedom and their autonomy by bringing to their attention substantive materials, helping them frame thinking about these particular issues, and so on. So regulation isn't necessarily incompatible with free thinking. Of course, as an academic teacher, as a professor, he's curating what his students think and only giving them the things he finds valuable. I'm interjecting that. But that brings us back to the question I touched on at the very beginning. The best argument for broad freedom of expression is skepticism about whether those who would regulate expression would do so in a way that was productive and constructive rather than simply making things worse. Sean Eiling says, although you keep expressing skepticism, you still seem to think that we'd be better off with gatekeepers, some institution or body of institutions that decides what should or shouldn't be expressed in the public sphere. Brian Leader says, that would seem to be the conclusion following from the arguments in the first part of the paper. But my conclusion is, even if there isn't enough positive value to speech to justify its unfettered expression, there are certain reasons to be worried about whether capitalist democracies will regulate speech in ways that aren't simply pernicious. But this has more to do with the pathologies of our political system than it does with the intrinsic value of speech. That's one of the main points I'm pressing on in this article. Sean Eiling says, as I read your paper, I kept thinking about the media critic Walter Lippmann, who struggled with these same questions. He didn't think most people could be trusted to decide intelligently what ought to be done, so he wanted technocrats and experts to act as mediators of sorts. But the problem is always, who are the arbiters of worthy speech in this imagined order? And how will we stop them from abusing their power? Brian Leader says, under the current circumstances, I think that's exactly right. But I'll also quote the German philosopher Herbert Marcuse, who, when asked, who will make these decisions, said, who makes them now? And that's worth bearing in mind. These decisions are, in fact, being made now. They aren't just being made by bureaucrats, they're being made by Rupert Murdoch, by editors behind the scenes, by producers on TV programs who themselves are responsive to all kinds of interested parties. Sean Eiling says, what's the alternative? We either live in a free society or we don't. There does not seem to be much room for compromise here. I mean, there's no marketplace of ideas that isn't saturated with bad ideas, right? Brian Leader says, I guess it's a matter of degree. Again, I think the problem now has to do with the pathologies of our political and economic system. Maybe what we need is for the political and economic system to change if we're ever going to adopt a more sensible approach to the regulation of expression. I also think most people fail to understand what's meant by free society. No one thinks we don't live in a free society because there are restrictions on public masturbation or public sex, right? There are always limits. We countenance all kinds of restrictions on freedom. It's always about trade-offs and what we're ultimately willing to live with. Sean Eiling says, well, I'd say free speech is crucial to individual liberty in a way that, say, public masturbation is not. But that's another argument. It's still not clear to me what you'd have us do. What is the solution? Leader says, it's important to recognize that most of what any of us believe about the world depends on intermediaries, people who guide us as to what we ought to believe because it's true. I believe in evolution by natural selection, but not because I did all the experiments in a lab. The big crisis of the internet era is that it has eliminated a lot of the traditional intermediaries, such as the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or PBS or the BBC and so on. Those old intermediaries weren't perfect, but they were better than what we have now. So I think we need better intermediaries to help people sort out the world. But again, I don't anticipate a law being passed that shuts down Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh. We're stuck with them, which means we're stuck with a public sphere filled with nonsense. So the short answer is that we're screwed. Eiling goes on to say, look, the ideal political system is one in which everyone is wise and discerning and cares very deeply about the truth. But such a system is not possible, has never been possible, and so we must live in the least imperfect and most just society that is possible. Has liberal democracy not proven to be just that? Leader says, I'm not sure it's that simple. Liberal democratic societies have certain values, and they're mostly good. But the problem is having a capitalist economic system that pollutes the public domain and presents all sorts of obstacles to the intelligent suppression and the intelligent expression and regulation of speech. Under capitalism, at least the sort of capitalism we have now, the ruling class completely distorts our political process and the laws that get enacted. Until we do something about that, we're not going to be in any position to hope that regulation of speech, let alone other aspects of law, will actually be conducive to human well-being. Eiling goes on to say, This is ultimately why I don't know what to do with your paper. I agree with your general diagnosis here, and yet we end up at a dead end. Leader says, well, if I might reference one of my favorite philosophers, whom I know you like as well, Nietzsche, said, sometimes the truth is terrible, and I think there's a value in recognizing the truth of our situation, even if it's terrible. We have massive amounts of worthless, dangerous speech in the public sphere right now, and at the same time, I can't see any legal remedy that isn't likely to be used for even more pernicious ends. But the situation we're currently in is quite dire, and the fact that we have a monster child as our president is proof of that fact. Eiling goes on to say, Sean comes back at him and says, given everything you've said, given the paucity of realistic situations, what's the point of an article like this? Why make the case against free speech if there aren't any viable means of improving speech? Leader goes on to say, the fact that there aren't solutions now isn't a reason to not identify the problem. And of course, one point of the article is to challenge what I think is a slightly unthinking popular consensus. Free speech isn't an inherently good thing. It can be good or it can be bad, and normally we think of the law as something that can step in when things can both be good and bad, like operating a motor vehicle, for example, which is why we have rules about it. But in the case of speech, we have a good reason to be worried about whether we'll make the right rules. And therefore, the real question that we need to talk about isn't about assuming the intrinsic value of speech. It's about why we have a political and economic order that makes it impossible for us to regulate all of the bad things about speech in a reliable way. That article was on Vox. I like that article, but at the end of the day, it still has this smacking of, I'm sorry, but Mr. Professor Leader is still coming out and saying things about the President of the United States, which may or may not be true, but that's the problem. I think the problem is you've got half the population, almost half the population, who voted for our president, and are they wrong? And I think one of the real problems that we have in our culture right now, and again, the whole point of this YouTube channel that I've started is the fact that we should all be able to talk to one another. We should all be able to have dialogue. Now, one of the things that I presuppose about that dialogue is that everybody here is smart enough to realize that you can do it. You can have that conversation. I assume people are mature enough adults that they know enough that they can get into a room and talk to one another without hurling bottles at each other's heads. That's what I would assume. I have moderators to make sure that that is the case. I wish I didn't have to have moderators. Honestly, I do. I wish that we could just all hang out and talk about whatever things, but unfortunately we can't. We don't live in a society that's as mature as I would like it to be. Hell, look at me. I'm not as mature as I want to be. Hence the fact that I'm surrounded by everything that I'm surrounded by. Maybe my whole life is a testament, maybe to immaturity. I guess you could look at it that way. But I do believe in the concept of free speech. I think one of the things that we need to look at when dealing with issues like this is we have to make sure, again, I've always said that our national security, indeed our democracy as it moves forward, is reliant upon two very important things. One is education for its own sake. Our public education system should be our number one priority. That should work hand in hand with the health of our population. Those two things, a healthy and educated population, is, I think, the only way to move forward together as a nation and to make sure that this democracy thrives into the 21st century. I really believe that. And I believe that both of these things are falling down, falling apart, failing us. I think about what it was like to go to school when I was going to public school in the 70s and 80s. There were all kinds of programs. The teachers, for the most part, were quite good. I found myself energized by the education I was getting at the public school system on Mercer Island, Washington, which now is a very elite place to live. And our public school system was always well funded because it was always families. I could never even afford to live in my former small town. I couldn't live there. I could if I made a blockbuster movie or something, but right now I couldn't even afford to buy the house that I grew up in. But I do think that education for its own sake, allowing people to explore things, that's why after school programs are so important. That's why when we have economically depressed areas of the country, that's where we should spend more money, get some of the best teachers to come in there, maybe not make them lifers, but have some of our best teachers rotate in and out and inspire students at all levels. Who knows where that's going to lead? You can't quantify, put a dollar value next to it, but teaching for the tests and teaching Common Core and all this gobbledygook is not really helping anyone. And judging by academia today, I don't think our public schools are doing what they need to do, especially as we move forward into a technologically advanced, civilization. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I just think that our public education and our public health are two of the most vital areas of our democracy that we have to look into. And I do think because our government is by the people and for the people, the better educated the people are now, the better off our government, the healthier our government is going to be later. Because after all, our government is just made up of us. Nancy Pelosi wasn't 1,000 years old all the time. At one point, she was a girl. She grew up. She went to junior high, middle school, I don't know, but went to high school and college. She was a young girl. She wasn't the person she is now. Mitch McConnell, I don't know what he was like when he was in elementary school, but I'm sure he liked some of the same things that I liked when I was a little kid too. Unfortunately, he didn't have Star Wars. He also didn't have Star Trek when he was a kid, so I pity him there. But everybody was once a kid. You know, I think about that all the time. Everybody in government, all the people you like and all the people you hate were once children. And so were we all. And we should have common ground. And I think speech, free speech, even the speech that you don't want to hear, is very, very, very important in order to keep our documentaries. Well, our documentaries true as well. The ACLU says the digital revolution has produced the most diverse, participatory, and amplified communications medium humans have ever had, the internet. The ACLU believes in an uncensored internet, a vast free speech zone deserving at least as much First Amendment protection as that afforded to traditional media such as books, newspapers, and magazines. The ACLU has been at the forefront of protecting online freedom of expression in its myriad forms. We brought the first case in which the U.S. Supreme Court declared speech on the internet equally worthy of the First Amendment's historical protections. In that case, Reno versus American Civil Liberties Union, the Supreme Court held that the government can no more restrict a person's access to words or images on the internet than it can snatch a book out of someone's hands or cover up a nude statue in a museum. But that principle has not prevented constant new threats to internet free speech. The ACLU remains vigilant against laws or policies that create new decency restrictions for online content, limiting minors' access to information, or allow the unmasking of anonymous speakers without careful court scrutiny. Also, I had one more thing I wanted to read, but I can't seem to find it, which bums me out. Oh, well. I guess I'll stop there. That's just what I wanted to discuss. Just a little bit of a discussion of free speech. And in that spirit, let's see what you all have to say, because there's been quite some interesting things that you guys have written in. Guys, girls, kind souls, gentle beings from across the 28 known galaxies. And let's see. This one is, let's see, the first one I'm going to read here. Our friend Arnold Schwarzenegger has written it again. Dear Rob, hope you are well. The Terminator said he'd be back, and I'm back. I'm listening to your Ethan Hawke WandaVision Robservation podcast as I write this. I'm sure you've heard by now that Godzilla vs. King Kong is confirmed to come day and date with HBO Max, and the release date has also been pulled earlier into March. Yes. This is a sign of Warner Brothers and Legendary mending their bonds, and I hope this means good news for Dune. Speaking of which, I have actually noticed something. Some time ago, the Sopranos prequel, The Many Saints of Newark, was actually delayed from early March to late September. At the time, this made no sense to me, as it was going to be released day and date with HBO Max anyway. The fact that Godzilla vs. Kong has taken over the March slot means that Warner Brothers considers the tentpole as a loss leader and would be purely assessing the movie based on the subscriber acquisition, as most of the cinemas would still remain closed by then. Instead of having two Warner Brothers movies competing with each other, it made sense that they decided to delay the Sopranos prequel to late September. But there's a catch. The Soprano movie is now scheduled for the 24th of September, and guess what comes out just over a week later? That's right, Dune. Do you remember a couple letters ago I sent you an article which suggested that Dune might get an earlier release than expected? Well, Warner Brothers will not want their movies to compete with each other, and so I got a feeling that Dune might get pulled to an earlier release date. Keeping the October release might dissipate the hype somewhat, so an earlier release might actually be healthier. Here's the old article for reference. Of course, this is under the assumption that Dune goes day and date release with HBO Max. I'm hoping Warner Brothers and Legendary make a deal where the latter will agree with the HBO Max release strategy in exchange with the former greenlighting and funding of the two subsequent sequels, Dune Prophet and Dune Messiah, regardless of the box office performance. If Warner Brothers agrees to greenlight and fund the next two Dune movies in exchange for the HBO Max release, I feel this would be the best case scenario. I know my viewpoints and why I believe a Dune Max strategy is more advantageous. Here I'm going to put, this is an article I haven't read, so I want to read this. I want to put this in the live chat for everyone to read. Let me put this down there so you can read the article. There you go. All that said, what do you think is actually going to happen, and what do you think should happen? Either way, I hope the movie is a success. Thank you for reading, Rob. I wish you and your family all the best, and I hope you have a great day. Kind regards. I'll be back. Terminator out. Great letter. Look, there are two facts of life about movies that I think are as we've talked about on the show many, many times. Movies gain more value through a theatrical release. If a film if it does well at the box office, its value is increased. Its profile is increased. If the movie's a huge hit, the spillover into the rest of pop culture. I mean, I always go back to my 81-year-old mom. If my mom hears about a movie through, her grandkids or me or something, or my sister, she might not ever have any desire to see the movie, but she's heard that it's out there. And if a movie has great success at the box office, it's a good bet that somehow my mom will know it exists. And when my mom says to me, "So Bob, have you seen the blah, blah, blah," which she sometimes does, I'm like, "Yes, Mom." And that means that a good theatrical release, a successful theatrical release, permeates the pop culture, goes all the way up to my 81-year-old mother, and that's value that you can only get through a theatrical release. So still, for movies, a very successful theatrical run provides value that you cannot get any other way. Unfortunately, on a streaming service, I used to tell people, I used to say, it doesn't matter. Like, when I think about my favorite movies, I usually think about the craft involved in making them. Not necessarily how much money was involved, but the craft, the how much time and effort was put in by the filmmakers to create something. Reading about how Apocalypse Now, the way the film was edited, they basically made I think it was 2.5 edits a day. That's what for the amount of cuts that are in Apocalypse Now, translated back, it took them like 2.5 years to cut the movie. And I think about it, they made 2.5 edits a day. Maybe it was a 1.5, but I think it was 2.5 edits a day. And I think about that, and I'm like, well, the one thing that with Apocalypse Now, everybody famously knows that Brando showed up on set. Coppola basically had to rehearse with him. They didn't even know what they were going to do. The part wasn't, so they were kind of making it up as they went. But Apocalypse Now is one of my favorite films, and from an editorial standpoint, I always marvel at it. All three versions, actually. But the time they put in, that when you watch Apocalypse Now, whether the movie works entirely for you or not, you still know that, oh boy, they certainly slaved over this movie. They made sure that what you were getting was something that was crafted. It was expensive and it was crazy to make and all that, but you really feel that it has value. Same with something like, I just read an article about how Paul Thomas Anderson hated Fight Club when he first saw Fight Club, and talked about how it made fun of cancer. And David Fincher was like, I'm sorry he hated it that much, but it's interesting. I still think you watch a movie like Fight Club, at the time, it's just beautifully made, beautifully conceived. And one of the things I love about Fincher movies, whether you like Fincher as a filmmaker or not, so much craft and thought goes into his films. And, I feel that way. Like Karen Kusama, a movie that I really love. Karen Kusama, before she made Destroyer, which is another movie I really love. I mean, Nicole Kidman, my God. I mean, people understand Nicole Kidman's a great actress, but when the versatility she shows, Destroyer is a great movie. But her first movie that she made before Destroyer, it's not her first movie, but the movie she made before Destroyer was The Invitation. And if you haven't seen The Invitation, it's another movie that I feel that has great authorship, and it's a movie that's basically set in a house. But the craft on display and the way it was made, I just really love how everything kind of comes together. I'm kind of getting off topic here, but the whole point is, when you go to a movie, it doesn't matter how much it costs. If you see a film in a theater that you love, and if it really moves you, and well, maybe it'll make money, maybe it won't, but there's value to that film because you see it bigger than life. So it's able to permeate into your soul more than... Look, I'm of the belief that any movie is made better seeing it on a big screen with a good sound system, great projection, and people who shut the fuck up. That, to me, when you see a movie it's larger than life, it penetrates your soul, man. And you like it more. So I'm all about a theatrical release. Right now, you can't, in this country, the grip of the pandemic that we're in, we can't open theaters. There's just, and you read about the rollout of the vaccine. I'm sorry, this isn't political, but it's been completely botched in this country. Completely botched. If you realize and you read about what's actually happening with the rollout of this vaccine, it's embarrassing. As most things that have happened in this country over the last year have been embarrassing. I mean, thank God we don't have to fight like World War II, because we're wholly unable to get our asses in gear and even distribute vaccine to a very needy population. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. But the way things are going, I would be very surprised if anybody's going to the movies anytime in 2021 in theaters. I hate to say it, but maybe things will turn around. I hope they will. But I mean, at least I know that I'm going to be seeing, as much as I don't want to, because I loved seeing Godzilla vs. King of the Monsters in the theater, I want to see Godzilla vs. Kong in a movie theater, especially with that just the little bit they released. Come on, brah. Who doesn't want to see that? I want to see that. The little kid in me is jumping up and down. So anyway, I think that it's strange to me that The Many Saints of Newark wouldn't debut originally on HBO in the first place, but I understand what they want to do. I mean, it's a Sopranos prequel, so there's something kind of fitting for it to debut on HBO. But look, Terminator, I want to see Dune. I want to see it in IMAX. I want to see it in the biggest screen possible. I'd like to see it at the Chinese theater, if it's even there after the pandemic is over. Who knows? But or at Universal on a giant IMAX screen. That's where I want to see Dune. If it's on TV, I mean, I think you might be right. I've been talking about the fact, as far as I know, it's never been reported that there's supposed to be 3 Dune films. In its conception, it's going to be Dune, Dune Prophet, and Dune Messiah, and you tell the whole story of Paul Atreides. This was I hate to say it, but this was inside information that I gleaned from certain people that told me these things, and I trust them. And they're not prone to hyperbole, nor do they make stuff up, because they don't have to. But that's what I heard was going to be the plan. And boy, do I want to see Dune in the theater. But if it debuts on HBO Max and movie theaters aren't open here, let me tell you what, I'm not waiting. I'm going to be watching it. So there you go. Who's next? This comes from Stubble McShave. our friend Stubble, one of the cornerstone members here of the Post-Geek Singularity, a man who loves Wheel of Time more than I love Star Trek, and that's saying a lot. Hi, Rob. I've had some more thoughts about the diversity in entertainment that's happening nowadays. To me, most of it feels surface deep. They usually change or select some of the characters to be that of an underrepresented group. It could be that the protagonist is black, Asian, Latino, gay, or female. They usually don't let this inform the storytelling any deeper than just the surface of the characters. I've seen many instances where this has been done quite poorly, and you just know that they're ticking off boxes to be as diverse as possible without putting in the legwork of actually doing it for real. I've wanted to see more diverse storytelling in themes and story forms for some time. The powers that be in Hollywood are very attached to the Western style of storytelling themes. It primarily centers on the development of the individual. Speaking in terms of Western storytelling, often focus primarily on the following aspects: self-esteem arcs, characters change, struggle against enemies, and individual heroism. As a contrasting point, let's look at the East Asian themes they often focus on: internal struggle, group heroism, relationship between individuals and larger societal groups, and a character's self-realization. If we look at the movie Mulan and look at the difference between the Disney-fied version and the traditional Chinese story, we can see some of these differences. In the Disney version, the story follows traditional Western storytelling themes. It's about a character rebelling against the expectations of society. The character finds herself as fulfilling her own desires to break free from the traditional place that society has placed her in, rejecting her traditional role in society and fight against an external enemy in a war. That's all well and good, but it's pretty far from the original Chinese folktale. Bear in mind that I read this a long time ago, so I might have forgotten some aspects. In that original story, Mulan agrees to take up arms in her father's place because he was too old to fight. She doesn't do that to break away from either her obligations or from her family. She does it to honor her family. She does it reluctantly as a sacrifice for her family. She actually prefers her life in the traditional role in the societal family structure and enjoys the finer clothes and makeup. It sets up a notion of femininity that's non-binary. She can both wear fine clothes because she wants to, as well as fight against an enemy when the situation calls for it. One doesn't exclude the other. In the folktale, they focus more time on the period before and after her time as a warrior rather than the action elements of her as a fighter. It also has that focus of sacrifice for the group rather than the individual. I think that was one of the reasons the movie flopped in China. The typical Western empowerment story, the emphasis on individual heroism and the disdain for traditional feminine qualities probably made it ring false in many ears in China. It was a Western story with a Chinese spray tan. I would rather see the true folktale in a movie. I don't think it would be as great of a spectacle, but I would probably find it more authentic and interesting. Other than story themes, I'd also like to see more diverse versions of story forms. In Western culture, we usually have the 3-act structure in most movies. In the first act, we introduce the characters, the problem, and the main story elements. In the second act, we develop the story as well as increase the tension and the conflict. Finally, in the third act, we have the resolution to the story that often comments on a question raised in the first act. If we return to East Asian storytelling and their storytelling forms, they often use a 4-act structure. They usually do not pit the different storytelling elements against each other directly. Instead, they often introduce the main characters and the elements in the first act. Then in the second act, they build on those characters and elements without introducing a lot of conflict. In the third act, they spring a surprise twist on us, which makes us reevaluate the situation. I could say The Handmaiden is a good example of that. Finally, in the fourth act, they resolve it all, often with another element to the story that harmonizes the ending in a satisfying conclusion. The movie Parasite, which more or less swept the Oscars last year, is a good example of a 4-act story form. There are other cultures with other story forms and storytelling themes that I would find fascinating to learn more about. I'd like to see those types of stories made into movies or TV shows with substantial budgets behind them. I hope we get a few more of those and less of the bad version of the tokenistic stories that are just trying to tick off boxes of perceived diversity on a spreadsheet. As I said earlier, I'm not an expert on East Asian storytelling forms, nor on the Chinese mindset, so I might have gotten some things wrong in my commentary earlier. Anyway, that's all I had to say about that. Rob, what do you think of story forms and storytelling themes from other cultures? Would you like to see more of that kind of thing in some future Hollywood projects? Thanks, Stubble McShave. Well, what a great letter, Stubble. I love this letter, and I think it's a great. You make a lot of great points. And first of all, I agree with you 100%. The point of diversity is not simply color coding. It's to bring what is the color you if you grew up, say you're a Black American, if you grew up in this country and they include a Black character in a story, well, I would like to bring in some commentary. What did that character learn being Black in the United States that can add to that story? Just having a character who's Black there for representation's sake doesn't work anymore. I don't think it flies. It was one thing back in the 60s when Lieutenant Uhura was on the Enterprise bridge because it made a lot of sense, but if you're telling a modern story now, I mean, obviously in the future, the big thing that Star Trek has been failing to do is they have not made representation matter of fact. They're like, look at our representation. Look how it goes. I mean, let me tell you, if you didn't figure it out, let's have one of our characters say, I prefer to be called by these pronouns. Well, the problem with that is that you've shattered the verisimilitude of the 32nd century by doing that. Humanity would be very different. And people that are non-binary, people that are trans or whatever, these are going to be people that have been normalized long, long ago. And I think it's much more interesting to tell stories about people that what does the future hold for all of these people? When you saw Lieutenant Uhura matter-of-factly on the bridge, if she said, well, back when my people were in bondage, but she never did until literally Abraham Lincoln and his Emancipation Proclamation show up on the bridge of the Enterprise, and it was Lieutenant Uhura who said when Lincoln called her a charming negress on the bridge of the Enterprise, she said, and I'm sorry for saying that word, and she says, no, we've learned not to fear words in the 23rd century. That's an exchange on Star Trek, and she nips that shit in the bud. She's like, I don't need to give some woke speech to you. And by the way, Lincoln, I understand you're archaic. He even caught himself. It was Lincoln who says on the bridge, "Oh, I'm sorry I called you that," on the bridge of the Enterprise. And she says, "No problem." That says more about the 23rd century and where humanity's going than 3 seasons of Star Trek Discovery, where not only that, you have to have characters talk about their personal pronouns, and in terms of LGBTQ characters, they're segregated and only deal with one another. I mean, when Adira talks about her pronouns, she's telling Stamets, the one man who's in a loving gay relationship, to use the right pronoun. Like, really? I would have thought that was a conversation you didn't need to have with a gay man. I mean, what does that say to the whole LGBTQ population? All I can tell you is that a friend of mine found it, who knew he was gay from a very early age, found it incredibly offensive. As a matter of fact, has found the whole portrayal of the LGBTQ community on Star Trek Discovery monumentally offensive because it's othered them. They are othered, completely othered on the cast of that show, which is the exact wrong thing to do. So I think you're right when you're talking about, I've always loved foreign cinema. Again, you can watch John Woo's movies for the action content if you want, but I love also the melodrama. When you watch something like Hard Boiled, or you watch The Killer, or Bullet in the Head, or A Better Tomorrow, or God of Gamblers, whatever, there's an element of melodrama in all of these movies that I don't think would work ever in Western movies unless there's a really deft touch used. Or better yet, bring John Woo to America and let him make the movies that he wants to make. Oh, wait. But the thing is, I prefer, I grew up watching Japanese films. I grew up watching Chinese movies. I only recently came to Korean films, like in the last 20 years, but I love Korean movies. There's a sensibility there that there is that's different than Chinese and different than Japanese movies that I particularly find appealing. And I like, again, I love Tarkovsky. A lot of people think watching Tarkovsky's movies is like watching paint dry. I've got Bergman's box set right down there. I'm a fan of movies all over the world. Bollywood movies. My God, talk about a film sensibility that's way different from us. Bollywood itself, a lot of people just can't deal here in the United States, but there's something about watching. There's a joy inherent in Bollywood movies that is not in Western cinema, or not all the time. And when it is, sometimes we don't even like it. By the way, that's a good moment for me to mention that Tango Shalom plays on the 19th, just in a few days, at the 13th Jaipur International Film Festival in India. So I'm very excited about that. I can't believe it. A movie that I've made I made it with other people, obviously, is playing in India. And wow, how cool is that? Jamie Wright writes in, short letter. Hi, Rob. Expanding on yesterday's question about what makes a good director. When listening to you talking about Dave Filoni's Mandalorian episodes, you would always mention that Dave was learning how to direct with each episode and that he still needed improvement. However, to me, Dave's episodes were pretty good. They were pretty good. Is there any chance you could expand on the thought process of this comment and why you don't think he's a great director yet? Thanks, Jamie. Well, I mean, all I can say is that directing, especially live action directing, it takes practice. There are some people, I think, that are born just like people that are savants in certain things, playing instruments, for instance, music, being able to play the piano, being able to play a violin, being able to write well. There's people that are just born into it and that for whatever reason they understand these things. But I think most people, to get good at something, you have to practice. And I think directing is a lot like writing. I mean, learning how to tell stories with pictures and with everything that is involved, it's a skill set that's really, really difficult to learn. Some people, I think Steven Spielberg, at a very young age, showed he understood it. You know, there's few people, I think, that understand cinema as well as Spielberg does in terms of how to set up shots and move the camera. And I think he just has that kind of a visual mind. And I think that directing, it's a really hard thing to master. And you can't expect somebody to master it right out of the gate. Add to that the fact that they're making The Mandalorian using stagecraft technology, so they're not unconstrained. They can't do anything they want with the camera. There's a lot that's going on there. So I think that not only he's Filoni as an animator or working in animation, you can do anything you want. You don't have to worry where the camera's going to be. I mean, you do, because you have to worry about virtually where it's going to be, but you can really pretty much write and draw anything and however you want to move things around. I mean, it's a very different discipline than when you're actually on a stage and you're limited by what you can show and what you can't show, and by the stagecraft technology. And I think that makes it even more difficult to learn. So I think I thought he made marked improvements in his live action directing. And, I think, again, it's a skill set that it takes a long time to master and become great at it. Sometimes, look, Orson Welles working with Greg Toland making Citizen Kane is an amazing, I mean, from the language of film standpoint, it's an amazing feat, but I think Orson Welles was a born storyteller, and he applied when you're making a movie, it's just telling stories using a different medium. And if you inherently understand storytelling, I think if you're a great storyteller, you can jump between literature, film, and back again, because if you're able to, in your own mind, translate the way you think about images and storytelling on paper in your mind and organize it shot by shot, because films are just a succession of shots. And if you inherently understand how to make those, you don't just have to make each individual shot work, you have to make the shot that comes before and the shot that comes after work with the shot that you're working on. And that's a skill. And it's a hard thing to do. And it's a hard thing to master. And I think there's a lot of people that don't ever, even if you want to get into, even if you're making films. So yeah. Alex Porto writes in. Alex says, "Hello, Rob. I'm writing to you for two reasons. Regarding the short story contest, I searched for more details on the site, but did not find anything. Does the story need to be about a particular subject, What is the deadline? I already have an idea and started writing it. It would be awesome if you addressed it in a video. I will be doing that. Also, I want to finish up the film festival first and honor everyone that's participated. We are going to have details about the short story competition tomorrow, which is the 600th episode, which is going to be devoted mostly to the film festival, where you're going to meet some of my judges. I'm going to be interviewing some of the judges that are participating in the film festival and talking about their careers, such as my good friend Darren Scott, who is a director and a producer, produced movies such as Menace to Society and Tales from the Hood. So I'm going to have him on. Ashley Miller I'm going to be talking to. There's a lot of people that you're going to meet for the first time on this show, and I'm going to talk to them about their careers. They're all entertainment industry professionals for the most part, and that's what I'll be doing tomorrow on the 600th show, but I'm going to talk about the short story competition. And so you're going to find out more about that. And Alex goes on to say, number 2, here's the second reason. I just wanted to say that I'm subscribed to your channel for about a month now, and before that I watched you on the John Campea show. I first saw you on Collider Heroes, awesome days, and I always loved your passion for movies and comics. It's awesome what you've been doing to help people get a chance to make short movies, and now a short story. Keep doing what you are doing. It's really random, but did you see the Adi Shankar episode of Collider Heroes? You were not in it. Oh, I'm very aware. But man, what a legendary bad episode. Easily the most awkward and bizarre ever. Schnepp and Campea handled things as best they could. Just saw a few minutes the other day. Adi made everything so cringeworthy. Yeah, the Adi Shankar episode. Adi Shankar is a film producer. It was pretty cringeworthy. I don't know what to say about it. It's interesting that, thank God that the internet exists. First of all, though, I do want to say thank you very much, Alex, to about this. I mean, look, again, another part of this channel, I said that this channel is a place of the free flow of ideas, but it's also the channel, the reason that people wanted me to start this channel, John Schnepp being the first person who said I should, and then, of course, my girlfriend Elizabeth, who bought me this microphone, they wanted me to share my enthusiasm with the world as well in my unique and inimitable way, if I can't say that myself. But thank you. I appreciate that. But that's what, again, I want to share my enthusiasm for all of everyone else's work. I mean, I think that to be an imagination connoisseur is to really love this stuff. And what we are loving, after all, is we are loving all of these other people's great work. And in terms of films and television, all the many, many people that work on films and television that do what they do. And hopefully I've always used their work to inspire myself in my own work or just inspire my own life. And I think that sharing the enthusiasm that I have, and my enthusiasm, look, if I didn't really believe all this stuff, you guys wouldn't watch. I'd like to believe that the reason people tune in is, that I'm a believer, man. I'm a believer. But to answer your question quickly about the short story competition, here's the short story competition. The idea is that we are going to publish an anthology of short stories, assuming I get that you're all not horrible writers, that some of you have a modicum of talent, and I know that you do, and that's why I have no worries about that. Now, the short story competition is this. I call everybody imagination connoisseurs, but I've never really defined what that means. What is an imagination connoisseur? What does an imagination connoisseur look like? What do they think about? What do they think about? And I figured I want to publish an anthology of short stories that examine the idea of what it means to either be an imagination connoisseur, what it means, what kind of, if you're maybe you'll write a short story that you think imagination connoisseurs might like. But the book is going to be called The Imagination Connoisseurs. That's the title of the anthology. And in it will be short stories about that very subject. What is an imagination connoisseur? Or you can write a short story that you think will appeal to imagination connoisseurs. Or you can write a short story about people that aren't imagination connoisseurs. I'm not going to define it. The idea, the thesis statement is just the imagination connoisseurs. What does that mean? And in all of its myriad forms. So there you go. And the stories are between 5,000 and 10,000 words. Now, if you send in a story that's 4,798 words, it's loosely defined. No stories, the ceiling of 10,000 words is pretty much, I mean, maybe we'll give you a couple hundred more words, but we got to cap it. But the floor, look, if you write a half-paragraph short story that's hilarious and it works, we're not going to not publish it. But the general idea is between 5,000 and 10,000 words. No more than 10,000 words. But if it's only 4,000 words or 3,000 words, if the story's fucking great, so it's loose. But we'd like to see them between 5,000 and 10,000 words. I'd like to see them developed. I don't want people to send me a bunch of one-page short stories. It's not that. So we want something that's substantive. I mean, my dream, Ray Kinsella, is to publish a thick tome like I have, on my shelf here, something slipcase that we can have a dust jacket for. There's also a cover design contest that's part of the short story competition, like Jason Spriggs winning the competition for the film festival posters, which, by the way, we're going to get printed, and you'll be able to buy them on the website. So that'll be fun. And I got to call Jason. Jason, if you're watching this, do you have any time tomorrow? I'd like to put you on the show live and talk to you because you're a judge too. So yeah. So it's going to be a contest to design the cover of the book. And you don't have to design the typeface. It's just the image. So you don't have to design the typeface. It's just, what do you think? And then it'll be a dust jacket, the front and the back. So I'll leave that up to you. So there you go. That's where the short story competition is at. Let's see what we got here. TJ Splaney or Spillane. TJ Splaney writes in, UFOs and the nature of our reality. Greetings, Rob, and all of the Post-Geek Singularity. It's been a few months since I last wrote in. I've been watching the channel since the original Robservations episode, and I have to say I've been particularly enjoying Elizaviews lately. I hope Elizabeth is watching, so she hears that. I recently watched Possessor for the show, and holy shit, I was not at all prepared for the level of fucked upness young Cronenberg is willing to descend to. I absolutely loved it. My last letter was about a book you recommended to me on an episode of Robservations last year, The Last Werewolf, and how best to adapt genre fiction into live action. In this letter, I wanted to recommend a book to you, Rob. That is, unless you've already read it. The book is called American Cosmic by Dr. Diana W. Pasukla, who is a professor of philosophy and religious studies at UNC. It is both a nonfiction account of Dr. Pasukla's time with a group of anonymous scientists and Silicon Valley types who secretly study the phenomenon of UFOs and refer to themselves as the Invisible College. Might be where Grant Morrison got that. And also an examination of the influence of media and technology on memory and human belief systems. Here's a quick synopsis I pulled from Amazon. By the way, this book sounds right up my alley. Here's a quick synopsis I pulled from Amazon. Over the course of a 6-year ethnographic study, D.W. Pasukla interviewed successful and influential scientists, professionals, and Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, thereby disproving the common misconception that only fringe members of society believe in UFOs. She argues that widespread belief in aliens is due to a number of factors, including their ubiquity in modern media like The X-Files, which can influence memory, and the believability lent to that media by the search for planets that might support life. American Cosmic explores the intriguing question of how people interpret unexplainable experiences and argues that the media is replacing religion as a cultural authority that offers believers answers about non-human intelligent life. From the deserts of New Mexico to the archives of the Vatican, Dr. Pasukla's experience and insight into the beliefs of some of the smartest people on the planet makes for probably my favorite nonfiction book I've ever read. I highly recommend it to you, Rob, or any of the members of the PGS who are interested. It's a very accessible read, and I think everyone from casual sci-fi fans to deep sweat conspiracy nerds like myself will find it fascinating. I know the idea of conspiracy as a whole right now is tainted by current events, but I like to think of myself as one of the fun, non-insane conspiracy theorists who is more into researching weird shit than screaming at people online, and respects cogent discourse of all ideas, be them adherent to the Overton window or not. It really annoys me when people like me get lumped in with the alt-right and the Q lunatics, although I do think the impetus for Q, a supposed time-lensing technology project called Looking Glass, would make a pretty cool movie. Please don't come after me. Laugh out loud. Anyway, in closing, Rob, I wanted to ask you what your beliefs or ideas about aliens and UFOs are. Are you a nuts and bolts physical craft guy, a psychic projections guy, or more of the Jacques Valley type where it's somewhere in between, something unexplainably tied to human consciousness and the observer effect in a way that's currently beyond our understanding? I find myself more in the latter of the three groups these days, especially after reading American Cosmic. Live long and prosper. Well, TJ, that's a tall order. I have to say that I've said on the show a lot that when I was a kid, the Mercer Island Library, this town where I grew up, it was not the biggest section, but they had a great section on unexplained phenomenon. So when I was a kid, I read all these books on everything from spontaneous human combustion to the Bermuda Triangle to UFOs to ghosts. I mean, I loved it all. And I was like Fox Mulder, man. I wanted to believe. What do I believe? Like, look, as Jodie Foster said, if in Contact, if there's not intelligent life in the universe, it's an awful waste of space. I do believe that there is probably intelligent life in the universe. Have they come here? Very possibly. I don't think, look, I remember Sun Classic Pictures when I was a kid. They made these movies like The Outer Space Connection and Mysterious Monsters. And then they went on, they got a little fringier, In Search of Historic Jesus, In Search of Noah's Ark, The Lincoln Conspiracy. But whenever they would open, I was excited. I mean, they made trailers. I'll never forget that trailer, the trailer for The Mysterious Monsters. Sun Classic Pictures presents, and there's a scene where like Bigfoot's arm comes through a window and menaces some girl sitting on a couch. Hangar 18 was their only, or maybe not their only, but it was one of the, and Jim Conway, who directed Star Trek Enterprise, and well, he started on Next Generation. I think he directed Justice, but Jim Conway directed Hangar 18, and when we met him on the Next Generation and Enterprise docs, it was like, bruh, you directed Hangar 18, dude. Which I thought was pretty funny. But so I'm a huge fan of it. I'm a huge fan of phenomenon. I would love to believe. But again, I'm one of those people that I'd like to see evidence. However, I do believe that we have a very limited understanding of the universe that we live in. If you look at just how much we've come to understand about ourselves in the last 200 and 300 years and where our technology has come, especially in the last 50, it's pretty astonishing. And I think that if there is, in fact, extraterrestrial intelligence that has ever come to Earth, whatever, multidimensional beings have flown here in craft, whatever, they have to be far enough ahead of us in technology, let's say hundreds and hundreds of years. And if that's exponentially, if our technology is continuing to grow at an exponential rate, the kind of technology that we would need to understand these beings is beyond us now. Just like the technology doesn't exist to one day prove that there is a objective thing about good art. One day we will be able to quantify that. But I do believe in alien intelligence. I do believe that it's also possible. And the reason being is because I read science fiction. I read a lot of science fiction, and I understand there are ways that aliens, I mean, even we've depicted, some of our great science fiction writers have depicted how an alien intelligence could interact with Earth or people on Earth, and most of the general population wouldn't know about it. Again, there's so many places on this planet where there just aren't a lot of people. And if you wanted to conduct some kind of a meeting with an extraterrestrial intelligence, I mean, they would be smart enough to know they can't. I mean, we aren't mature enough to. Let's just assume that there are certain factions of various governments that have been dealing or talking to aliens for years. We as a people are not mature enough to accept this information at face value. Most of the world couldn't grapple with it because it would throw into question all of our core beliefs. I mean, even our basic texts, foundational texts, beginning with religion, Western religions, Eastern religions, Middle Eastern, if you're Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever, the idea of extraterrestrials would fundamentally change the foundational principles of all of our belief systems. And I think a lot of people would have a hard time coming to grips with that. So, and the aliens who are here, if they're here, would know this. So it's not necessarily like the prime directive, but assuming that they're not malevolent and they are somehow benevolent or whatever, they would, let's say we're going to join the Galactic Federation. I think that there would be clandestine ways how this would be happening. But I mean, again, what is Bob? What is the guy that Joe Rogan has on that says he worked on alien crafts and a lot of it was found in archaeological sites or digs or whatever? I mean, maybe that's true. We just don't know. I'd like to believe it's true. I mean, I'm Fox Mulder, man. I want to believe in all of it. It was interesting to me. I was having a conversation when we were walking the dogs last night with Elizabeth about spirit. She's watching this documentary on Netflix about what happens after death. And my whole thing is the way we think about death and the way we think about spirits and all that. Like, spirits are going to hang around. Like, if ghosts are real, like, yeah, man, they're sad ghosts and all that. But I'm like, how can that be? Like I've talked about Sadako or Samara in the Ring, the movie The Ring. If you die and you have a consciousness, like, we don't understand consciousness, how it all works. We don't get it. So if you die and your consciousness is unfettered by being constrained by your body, if you didn't have your corporeal existence, suddenly your whatever you wanted would change. And like, why would you stick around on this plane of existence if you were, how are you self-aware without a brain and eyes? Like, how could you hang out? How could you even make the decision to hang out? Like, you know what? I'm not going to go into that light. I'm going to hang out here. How do you make that decision being and where do you go? Like, how do you move? Like, none of that makes any sense to me at all. It all breaks down. So the idea of the afterlife, not really buying it. And everyone I talk to about the afterlife, they still think of it in terms of it's like a place. Or no, you're a being of spirit, but it's still like you go somewhere. The idea that you're going somewhere, like there's a place to go, whether it's heaven or hell. Like hell's this place. Everything about hell, the way it's described, is only interesting if you're corporeal, that you have a body. It doesn't, eternal damnation. Well, what does that mean? If you're taken out of your body, how are you eternally damned? How does that work? Is someone going to just remind me of Star Trek Discovery every day? Rob, remember Star Trek Discovery? Oh, you had to bring it up. I'm going to bring it up for the rest of eternity. Even then I would get used to it. But no, it's all weird. I want to believe in all strange phenomenon. The whole UFO issue and the idea of people's minds. Look, I think that there's a lot going on in our own minds that we don't yet understand. Starting with our dreams. How does that all work? Dream interpretation. How is our minds able to conjure up those kinds of images? And I think that, there is an energy, there is electromagnetic energy that's measurable in our brains. When we die, something happens. Does it go in? Conservation of energy. That doesn't mean that it just doesn't go into the ground and you're done. I don't know. I want to know. But UFOs, man, I want to believe. And while I don't think that there's no credible evidence, we've clearly seen things that are weird, that we can't explain. Are those aliens? I don't know. I'd like to believe maybe they are. Wouldn't that be cool if there were aliens? I'd dig it. Electron Star. Actually, you know what? Before I read Electron Star Collapse letter, let me jump over and see what you guys are saying in this chat. Did this chat talking about free speech, did it implode? There's let's see, we got 389 concurrent viewers. Well, thank you, viewers, for being here for all of that. But did it get too political? Did everybody go crazy in the chat? I don't know. Actually, you know what? I'll tell you what I do have to do is wipe off my glasses. Let's see. Paul in Long Beach wrote something 8 hours ago. Sorry I missed a lot this week, Rob. I've been working from early in the morning until late in the evening. I've been taking many calls and having many meetings. Wink, wink, many meetings. I get that. I see what you did there. Oh, that wasn't good. Something just fell in here. That wasn't good. Let's see. I already read those. Let's go back to where I was. Sorry about that. Charlie J sends in a tip and says, have you had a chance to watch season 3 of Cobra Kai yet? I have not. I've only watched season 1. The character Hawk in this series is such a beautifully written character. So many layers. Such a great job developing. He makes the series special to me. I really enjoyed last season of the show. Yeah, I mean, Cobra Kai, what a great way of dealing with a mythology. My God, incredible. Loved it. But I need to see the rest because everyone just says it keeps getting better. Stubble McShave says, I suspect Catherine Hahn, who plays Agnes in WandaVision, will turn out to be Agatha Harkness. Ooh. Maybe. I don't know. It's very, very crazy. Glenn Taylor sends in a super chat and says, Rob, my wife said she wanted to watch a movie with Liam Neeson in it tonight. Since she wasn't specific, I chose the 1983 movie Krull. Glenn, sometimes, man, sometimes I think you can be too clever. Why not Excalibur? But I'd be curious to hear what your mom thinks of, or your wife thinks of Krull. There's a lot in Krull I like. I love the Crystal Spider, and the Glaive. Write in. I'll be curious to hear what she says. Craig Stratton sends in a tip and says, so Kong vs. Godzilla have been moved to March. Surely we should have a trailer by now. FYI, Team Kong all the way. Well, I'm actually, Team Godzilla for me. But I understand. Kong's more of a representative of us. But anyway, let's see. I'm sure we're going to get a trailer momentarily. Willow is here. Willow says, Stephen King famously hated Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. Is he obligated at the moment to say good things about the latest adaptation of The Stand? He said that he's loving the series thus far. He's tweeted about it twice. I think he's probably obligated to say some things about The Stand. Now, I haven't caught up on the latest episode. To be honest, I find the whole thing inert. I think the flashback structure was entirely a wrong way to go about doing it. I've got friends that that I used to play Cast the Stand with, and they're kind of liking it. So maybe I'll go back and give it more of a chance, more of a fair shake. But right now, not feeling it. I'm glad that, I'm glad that he's liking it. I don't want to dislike The Stand. The book's one of my favorite books I ever read. I love The Stand. Chloe says, I've always found it interesting in Rambo Last Blood when he gave Gabriella a small blade made of Damascus steel. Considering that Damascus steel hasn't been around for 1,500 years, but then again, he is Rambo. If he wants to make Damascus steel, he is Rambo. Yeah, maybe he just put that in there. That's a good question. I didn't realize it was 1,500 years old. That's funny. Willow says, here's the problem I have with the Omega glory. You always said that you get one ask. The planet making everyone immortal was that one ask for me, asking me to believe that the planet also independently evolved Americans and communists. You've lost me. Well, I agree with you. Did you write that before I started this episode or after? Because if you started it before, Willow. By the way, if you've got time tomorrow, come on the show live. Love to talk to you. But that's really interesting. Yeah, that's pretty good. But I could believe that maybe somebody came and it didn't evolve. Somebody brought that to them, because why would they have English? I mean, yeah, it's a big ask. But when I'm trying to figure out why things happen, I'm like, maybe it's because that somebody, like on Sigma Iota, when somebody left the horizon, left behind Chicago mobs, the 20s, maybe somebody left the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, on the planet. So you're probably right about that. Brendan Sheehy says, Rob, now that Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany are getting widespread acclaim across the board for their performances in WandaVision, do you think the time has come for an MCU property to get some love in the acting awards arena, or is the comic book bias still there? I think the comic book bias is still there. But I don't think, I mean, look, we've seen Patrick Stewart and even Hugh Jackman in Logan. There's a comic book bias that exists, and eventually maybe that will go away, but there's absolutely a comic book bias. There's people, right now, people think it's not as hard to play Captain America or Black Panther as it is to play, Stanley Kowalski. That's just the way it is, and maybe that will change, but who hopefully soon. Fortunato sends in a super chat and says, "Hi Rob, I view tech channels like YouTube very similar to the post office. Is the post office responsible for the contents of every letter? Twitter is like the paparazzi or Twitterazzi checkmark mob." Yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah, I mean, Twitter, it's really interesting. I mean, I find it strange when people arbitrate themselves. They make themselves the arbiters of taste or what's correct to think or believe. I find that odd. Like, it's weird to me. Like, who are you to say that who are you to come after me? I've always thought that was kind of weird. But I think you're right about that. I like that. I like that idea. Similar to the post office. Double Crit sends in a super chat and says, "Hi Rob, just curious if you ever saw the Steam tips I sent in during the Tremors stream with Liz. Might write in a letter with more detail." Oh, I don't know. I thought we read everything. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look. Eric Gant said, "Should the everyday citizen be exempt from being kicked off a corporately owned site for violating the user's agreement? And if not, shouldn't we hold our president to the same standard?" Look, I agree. Eric, I'm right there with you. But they allowed Trump to violate their community standards for the duration of his presidency, and only when what? Only when our Capitol was besieged, they decided, okay, now we're going to kick you off. Look, to me, it's the hypocrisy. You're either going to uphold the terms of service or you're not. And I think that's really problematic. I think that by kicking him off when they did, they should have kicked him off the first time he went after somebody or whatever. And that's the problem that I have. The problem is that these tech companies, and it's all hypocritical. They don't practice what they preach until they do. And look, I love Twitter. I love Facebook. I love YouTube. I love all of these platforms. But again, if they're going to police themselves, they have to really police themselves. If they're going to uphold their standards, do you think Twitter wasn't loving having Donald Trump as president? It's only now, in his waning days of his presidency, they didn't get rid of him a year ago. I find the hypocrisy the problem, and how are they going to treat other people? It's just not a fan of what they did. But I think you're right. Nobody should be exempt from anything. You either practice what you preach or get out. Jason S is here. Jason says, "What's also happening is Democratic politicians are constantly harassing social media and other companies, demanding that their critics and political opponents be banned from the internet and banned from any other places in the real world, and they threaten to use the government to punish those companies if they don't comply, while also offering to use the government to provide them with many rewards if they do comply with their banning and censorship demands. This is government censorship." Well, Jason, I wasn't going to, read your letters, but I do think that you're correct about this, that, again, we have all kinds of double standards. And I think wielding that kind of power, look, we have this incredible information technology. And I've often said that we're going through an evolutionary period. We have to figure out, well, how the hell we're going to use it all. And I think right now, as I have said a lot, the people that scare me the most are the people on my side of the aisle, the left. The left. I considered myself a left-leaning liberal Democrat. But you know what? The people on the left scare me more because they're the people screaming censorship, and they're the people that want to quash free speech. And I never thought that would happen. But then again, if you look at the past, where a lot of socialism or fascism or things like that have come from, it's a little scary out there. Emil Johansson says, I believe nobody knows 100% what is morally correct. It comes down to opinions. And because of that, freedom of speech is important, because if people are forced to follow good opinions only, we fool ourselves into thinking what we do know what good is. I agree with you. I agree with you. 100%. Emil Johansson says, would it be cheap to make Deadpool come to the MCU through the multiverse? I don't think so. I think that could be hilarious. Bo Sanders sends in a super chat and says, howdy, Rob. Will there be more IICFF entries posted? Oh, yes. I've seen a couple listed as private or deleted, hoping neither was the exchange. Nope. You will be seeing more. Stubble McShave soon. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I see that you're not rocking a T-shirt. You're rocking the V-shirt. That is correct, Stubble. You know what? I was explaining to Elizabeth what this T-shirt is, and I said it's a relatively deep cut, but Stubble McShave got it. Yes, this is the Visitors swastika-esque logo from the V miniseries and then TV series. That would be the original from '83, and then the follow-up. I'm glad you noticed. Freeze Peach sends in 2 and says 1 of 2, and then I'll go into 2 of 2. What do you think about Section 230? This was the website protection Donald J. Trump wanted to get rid of so that they would not be legally protected for moderating his content. This is a very hot-button issue recently, and just not for the right. There are those on the left who believe Section 30 has problems. They feel sites should be held accountable to an extent for material they allow on their platform. For instance, harassment or fake news, somewhat related to the free speech discussion. Well, Freeze Peach, the entire first hour of the show was devoted to Section 230, and I think that there's a lot there. I would suggest going back and watching the beginning. I think that we need Section 230. I think that there should be protections for free speech. However, again, that doesn't mean you can say anything. What I don't want is some kind of committee that's going to start being the arbiters of taste and what we can and can't say. I think it's really different. It's a tough one. It's a very tough question, which is why I wanted to bring it up. Legal Claudius is here. Legal Claudius says, so this subject deserves a letter, but I'm not quick enough, so I'll try in super chats. This show's question of censorship hinges on a simple idea. Is my private commercial platform being used to promote and coordinate illegal acts? Now, that's what I said about Parler. Command and control of illegal acts. Remember, insurrection is illegal. Insurrection conspiracy is illegal. Including or promoting violence is illegal. A private company isn't obligated to allow you to commit conspiracy on their platform. Suspension is a remedy. The fact that the election was certified by 50 states, the U.S. Attorney General, and the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, and Infrastructure Security Agency determined that there was no widespread fraud. Now, what Claudius is saying, I 100% agree with. That if Parler, for instance, that was taken away by the servers or down by Amazon, was Parler being used for command and control of the insurrection, the riots, whatever you want to call them, that happened at the Capitol building? If they were, and it looks like they were, then by all means they should be taken offline. But the problem with that is I would like to see evidence of all of this. I think it's important that, and I agree with Claudius, if something is being used to commit a crime, it's being used to commit a crime. The problem is we haven't seen all of the evidence of that. Parler was just 86th, I think, let's face it, without, let's call it a fair trial. And if it was taken offline, I think that it was taken offline and it was coercion by big tech, whether it was Apple, Google, and Amazon together. That was what was scary. It wasn't like, here we are presenting the actual evidence of what they had did. They colluded, groups colluded, or they used Parler together to commit criminal acts. If that was the case and that evidence was there, I still think that, well, we have to make sure the evidence was correct, and that's why you have our justice system. But to go and just say, the thing that I object to is to just get rid of a platform for people. So far, to me, it was hearsay. You got to show us. You got to show us the criminal intent was there. You can't just say it was, that people were saying these things, and because that sets a dangerous precedent. But I absolutely agree with Claudius. If something is being used to commit a crime, but we need a fair shake. We need our justice system to work. Claudius says, determining truth requires maintaining journalistic standards, which requires independent sources. Unfortunately, many media sources wouldn't be accepted in an undergraduate term paper. I agree. The Blaze isn't the WallStreetJournal.com, but standards cannot be legally mandated. No, it's true. I completely agree, and it's tough. But that's what this is where common sense comes in. This is where we have to start saying, look, we need credible sources. We need journalistic integrity, and so much of our journalism now is being defined by whether or not it's entertaining, clickbait and all that. We used to have a standard that we would uphold, that our journalism was something that not anybody with a blog could call themselves a journalist, and that was important. And we need to get back to that. The fourth estate? We really need to get back to, again, part of having the kind of society we want is we must demand journalistic integrity and accountability. And that's part of what our libel laws and things refer to. But they don't refer to, well, Section 230. It's part of the whole thing. So somebody, it looks like it's in Arabic, I believe, subscribe to the channel. Well, thank you for subscribing to the channel. I can't read your name, though. Lewis Tully says, are you a fan of Samurai Jack? I am a fan of Samurai Jack, but I'm not a big fan. I can't wax rhapsodic about it the way I can wax rhapsodic about other franchises. Jackson Perez says, holy hell, Run, Hide, Fight was incredible. As someone who just got out of high school, it's eerily realistic and visceral. Fantastic acting as well. Very impressed by this pickup by the Daily Wire, and I'm all in if this is what their content will be. Well, Jackson, I've actually caught some flack from people who, again, mistook the fact that I was talking about Ben Shapiro's The Daily Wire acquiring the movie Run, Hide, Fight as some tacit approval of Ben Shapiro himself. No. I've watched Ben Shapiro. As I've said, there's things that he said that I like, and there's also a lot of stuff he says that I don't approve of. And but the point that I was trying to make was that for the Daily Wire to pick up North American distribution rights for the movie Run, Hide, Fight was very interesting for me as an independent content creator, an independent filmmaker, to see that they're picking up, because I said that's kind of what I'd like to do in the future with films. I'd love for the Burnettwork to be able to one day have the kind of money or finances to be able to acquire a movie and distribute it. Now, one of the things about Run, Hide, Fight is it came from the same producers, Dallas Saunier, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who produced Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, and Dragged Across Concrete, all three movies that are hardcore that I enjoy. So I thought it was really interesting that their latest film that the studios wouldn't touch or they couldn't find distribution was right up the Daily Wire's alley in terms of its subject matter. But to hear you say that it's good is a good thing. I'm really excited. Glenn Taylor sends in a super chat and says, the first superhero movie I ever saw was the 1981 film Super Fuzz, and I was blown away by it. Saw it years later and realized it was cheesy. Yeah, but you didn't allow your nostalgia to be able to, you still were allowing your intellect to kick in, and you could decide whether or not it was good now, which is good. Did you show your wife Super Fuzz too? Claudius, our man Claudius, who's one half of our official first couple of this channel, goes on to say, censorship. Social media platforms such as Facebook censored content from Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and Shabab. Neo-Nazis and white supremacists also get the same treatment. Are their rights being infringed upon? No. The editorial boards for new outlets choose what stories to run. They choose to omit certain sources, perspectives, and opinions. And through programming and editorials, they promote certain perspectives. Example, there's no Al-Qaeda news hour on Fox. That's true. It's true. I can't disagree with you there. But on the other hand, who's going to make those? Who's going to make those decisions? Again, it's hard to say. It's tough, and I think that we have tough choices that we're going to have to make. Stubble McShave says, concerning if art is subjective and or objective, I think I found a way to determine it. It's connected to Star Trek. I'd say that if Data can determine if art is good or bad, then it's objective. He analyzes things without bringing in subjectivity. Yeah, but does he? I think Data's got a subjective point of view too. I think he does. The way his algorithms work, the way his brain functions, I think he definitely has things that he feels that he's subjective. Alexander Wilson says, until the public school funding formula changes, kids won't have access to good education. Many state and local taxes fund public schools, which is why schools in affluent areas are statistically better than poorer areas. I grew up in D.C. and went to public school in the 90s. The city was the murder capital of America. We were in classrooms that had mold, asbestos, ceilings falling down, and not having enough textbooks for every kid in the school. We had to share textbooks. That's my point. This cannot continue. We need to, the first thing, slice away some of that military spending and put it into education. And the fact that we put up with this show, that we put up with this bullshit, we must make education and healthcare the number one priority and calculate or what's the word? I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on this word. Reframe it. We have to reframe it as a national security issue. We need to have the smartest, healthiest population on this planet, and we need to pay for it. And that's what we should do. Richard says, I missed the first half of the show. The problem is that tech has become a cartel. Bring back the ghost Roosevelt. Bring back the ghost of Teddy Roosevelt and break them all up. The tech is a dime a dozen. Big companies only have one thing going for them, server space. Easy problem to overcome. I think eventually, unfortunately, you still need the infrastructure owned by big tech, whether it's AT&T or others. But eventually, I think people are gonna build their own. Samurai sent in a super chat and says, this is why I can listen to you, Rob. You're left, but center left. I'm center right, and sometimes center left, like with the environment. This is how we break bread. I agree with you 100%. Look, I don't even understand why, when we're living in a closed biosphere, that anybody would rescind environmental protections. I don't think that's a partisan issue. I understand that we want to make business easier to do, and environmental protections are a pain in the ass. But then again, so is dying of cancer when the groundwater or the dirt is polluted. We live in a closed system. I mean, just because we're outside, you flick something, anybody flicking garbage outside, where do you think it's going to go? I mean, we have to, again, it blows me away that we are not like, nope, there's plastic in the ocean. Well, why aren't we going, let's fix that problem like right away. Well, we'll fix emissions by 2050 because of business. Great. So we're all going to die until then? Like, I don't get it, man. I mean, I get it. I mean, if we just, look, big business and making a profit is more important than people's lives. The universe is indifferent to our suffering, and we should just say, we care more about doing business than we care about people's lives. Once you make that admission, I think decisions are a lot easier to make, where you can be like, oh, there's no... Just get rid of the hypocrisy. I get it, man. You want to get rich. You don't want to protect the environment because protecting the environment's expensive and it cuts into your profits. Just say it. Just come out and say it. I mean, and then we can be like, okay, fuckers, I'm not going to buy your fucking product anymore. If you find that polluting the environment and using plastic bags and making everything easier and more profitable is the way to go, well then, but I get it. We're willing to sacrifice certain things because out of sight, out of mind. But we got to be honest about it. Richard says, also, the gleeful banning of Trump was a woeful short-term mistake. The rest of the world saw world leaders' voice silenced by a major corporation, everything they fear. the president of Mexico is already mobilizing a compact against the Silicon Cartel. Look, I agree. I am no fan of Trump, as anybody who's watched this channel for any length of time knows. I think silencing him was a bad idea. But then again, like Claudia said, did he participate in a criminal act? Very possibly. From my point of view, he certainly did. The pre-recorded message he released on the day of the Capitol riots or the insurrection, whatever you want to call it, I thought was inciting to act. He's the president of the United States, and I think we can expect more from our president. And President Trump has not been a president for everybody. He was a president for the people that only he approved of, and I think that that's not the best way to govern. And I'm not saying that's not what a lot of our presidents have done, but at least there was a pretense of trying to speak for everybody. I mean, our president was openly insulting people on Twitter. I just think that's a bad look. I think that's bad leadership. I think it's a bad look for everybody else. I think it makes America look weak. I think President Trump was a liability to our national security in certain quarters. Now, I know a lot of people disagree with me about that, but I think that he was ultimately, because it's not just about standing up to people through might or something like that. You know what I just realized? I have to be on a conference call. It's 5 o'clock. So on that note, hang on, let me just rifle through. Michael Preston sends in a super chat and says, I have no problem with Trump on Twitter. I have a problem with the president of the United States due to a national security issue. Due to national security. What are your thoughts? I agree with that. I think our national security has been compromised on a number of levels by a number of things. And but again, Sam Uri says Twitter and Facebook also used to do crimes by Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Well, again, command and control. We have to look into all of this. And when you say crimes, what are those crimes? And we have to decide. And these things have to be proven. Can't just say them; they have to be proven. Glenn Taylor sends in a super chat and says, Rob, my wife didn't last 15 minutes into Crawl. So I showed her the trailer for Tango Shalom. She loved it. Happy wife, happy life. Well, Glenn, I appreciate you saying so. I'm sorry she didn't last into 15 minutes into Crawl. I know it's an acquired taste, but please give her my best. And that's why you're married for 24 years. You didn't take it personally. Joseph says, oh, hi, Rob. Watch Army of Darkness in whining about movies. Would love to hear your stories from the set. That's not a bad idea. I could do that. Might seem a little self-serving, but we did watch Evil Dead, so I could show Elizabeth that. Could be fun. Ari sends in a tip and says, you can only ban Parler for coordinating the riots if you also are willing to ban a phone service for people using phones for doing the same thing. That's a very, very good point. And that's why I think it's there. You need more than just saying it. You got to have evidence, court of law kind of a thing. But you're right. Absolutely right. Steve Foley says, let's make 1984 fiction again. Yeah, I know, right? Oh, my God. Swimmy sends in a super chat and says, Glenn Greenwald said in an article that planners of the Capitol breach all had a presence on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc. were supercharged by those platforms. Quite a few people arrested did not have Parler. Look, I agree. I don't think what they did to Parler was a good thing. Like I said, I had a Parler account. I'd never used it. I'd only gone on to set it up. But, I was actually looking forward to having a place where I could go in and hear people's thoughts, hear people's ideas. Like I go all over the place and I listen to all kinds of things. But I agree with you. I think it was bad. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I have to jump onto a business call right now that I completely forgot about. But I want to thank everybody for being here. I thought we had an interesting show. At least I thought it was interesting. Tomorrow is my 600th show. I'm still putting together what I'm doing for the 600th show. It's a little last minute, but it's going to start at noon. And you know what? I'm not going to go on for 600 minutes. I'm going to go for 6 hours. So tomorrow I'm going to be on for 6 hours from noon to 6 p.m. Please, if you want to write letters, I will be on that show tomorrow. So 6 hours, it's all good. And will be fun. It'll be fun. Starting at noon tomorrow. So I hope you can be there. I want to thank my moderators, beginning with Mike Bodden. I want to thank The Richard. I want to thank Justin Toner, Greg Smith. I want to thank everybody else who's here. Justin, The Richard, I think, is Josh Levesque here? I don't know if he is. Well, I think you guys are. Greg Smith is here. I want to thank everybody for being great. My moderating staff is great. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel through tips and super chats and sending in letters. It's great. Please go to the Burnettwork.net website and tune in, send me letters, and gosh, I got all these kind of people talking to me when I'm live on the show. And I don't know if we're going to do a show tonight, to be honest. I forgot that I had to go on this conference call right now. Maybe we will. If not, we'll do it tomorrow night. We'll do a whining about movies after my 6-hour show. So if it's not tonight, it'll be tomorrow night. It is Total Recall, and then we start Westerns, and then Viewer's Choice will be all through the month of February. You know what? I'm just going to call it. We're going to move tomorrow. Whining about movies will be tomorrow. It'll be tomorrow because I'm sure this conference call is going to last a while. Anyway, I will. I'll see you back here tomorrow for the 600th episode of Robservations. So thank you all very much. And with that, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, have a better day.